Hi, welcome everybody to the CEU Executive MBA Moscow Open Day. Dobro požalovat. My name is Thomas Lammel. I'm the Senior Program Manager, and I will guide you through the evening. We will start with the program presentation. Thereafter, you will have the chance to meet current participants and alumni. Professor Yusaf Akbar will then deliver a very current research presentation on life after COVID-19, business strategies for success. If you have any questions, please shoot them in the chat box and I will collect them for the Q&A at the end of the session. We're pleased to announce another successful collaboration with our partner Advantage Austria Moscow. We welcome Mr. Nuri Feichtinger, the commercial attaché at the Austrian Embassy in Moscow, who will now deliver welcome remarks. Welcome, Mr. Feichtinger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lammel. Welcome, everybody. I wish everybody a good evening from Moscow. On behalf of the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber and also the Austrian Embassy, we're happy to see that so many participants are in this call and that you're interested in education in Austria. And I'm looking forward to hear more about the program and the studies from my colleagues here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nuri. So, is an MBA still worth it, you might ask? You don't have to go very far these days to encounter that we are witnessing fundamental transformations in the world in a century, basically. In 2008, we had a big financial crisis. In 2015, we had a large refugee crisis. And right now, the biggest pandemic in a century. These changes are part of a much broader set of transformation that is taking place. Some of them are positive, and some of them are pretty dangerous, to be honest. So the key question is, how do we as business professionals prepare for this challenging and unpredictable environment? The obvious question is an MBA the way to do it? We have seen an explosion of online education, and I'll show you why we believe our MBA is worth it. So if you're interested in further education, you usually start searching for an MBA in the city you live in. What you tend to find is mostly a pretty standard curriculum. It's with a faculty who are delivering the program, which is local. The number of international students is relatively low. Some programs in Western Europe can be quite expensive, and a local program allows you not to leave your job. So if you contrast that with the top business schools in the world, they often have a very differentiated mission-driven curriculum. They offer a certain expertise or perspective or mission. Because of their full-time format, their student body is international, actually. You're leaving the labor market for 1 or even 2 years, which is another financial burden. And these programs are rather expensive at more than 120,000 euros or more, and you may have to move your family to the MBA location. So what we do at CEU is to offer the best of 2 worlds. There is no work interruption, thanks to the practical and flexible modular format. I will talk about it later. The Executive MBA is mission-driven. I will talk about the Executive MBA for the open world philosophy later. We have an international student body because of the modularity of the program. Actually, we are the second most international university according to the Times Higher Education. Participants can fly in and fly out, which is a major advantage of the program. And when we say world-class faculty, we really mean it. The follow-up course on big data and artificial intelligence, for example, will be taught by Miklos Koren, one of the leading scholars in the field in Europe with a Harvard PhD. For marketing, you'll have Aishu, a new entry and high potential coming from the Central Florida University. For leadership, Austin, our world-class psychologist with executive education experience on 4 continents, will lead the way. If you're new to finance, Joy is a uniquely gifted educator. Generation after generation of our students tell us how she's just unique in explaining complex financial concepts to her students. If you're already experienced in finance, you'll be placed in the advanced track course with Adam Zawodowski, a leading expert on complex investments with a PhD from Princeton. And for innovation, you'll have Mike Labelle, who holds a prestigious EU's Chair Monnet chair. Those are some examples of our visiting faculty. For example, Christian Selos from Stanford University, Professor Miklos Savary from Columbia, Omar Hernandez from Berkeley, Hui Chen from the University of Zurich, and Milena Nikolova, Chief Behavior Officer at Behavior Smart. So here's what the program looks like. It's a 9-module program. The dates you see on the screen are not going to change, so you can basically plan your studying around professional and family activities based on these dates. As you can see, we have 2 modules in the first year, in 2021, 4 in the second year, and 3 in the third year, which gives you flexibility and a balance in your life. As you can see, we are piggybacking around popular European holidays, like May 1st, or November 1st, or August 15th, when it's easier for you to take time off and you don't have disruption with your work life. In the summers, our bespoke and cutting-edge leadership program takes place in Budapest, and you'll have the opportunity to benefit from electives from the faculty in the world we invite to teach your classes. There will come the day when you finish with us at CEU and join the CEU alumni network from around the world. As I already said, CEU is the second most international university in the world, and you can rely on an active elite network on every continent in the world. We have city-level chapters, we have country-level chapters. Basically, wherever you are in the world, you will find CEU alumni to interact with, to mingle, to make friends, or to network with. The network is a network you can count on, and it's one of the key assets that we have. The question is, how are we able to offer such a high-quality program at only 25,000 euros? The answer is pretty simple. It lies in our founder and benefactor, George Soros, who created CEU with the mission to promote open society. Just recently, George Soros made a further contribution to CEU's mission by offering another $1 billion in endowment to create the Open Society University Network, which means we are the best endowed university in Europe. So what does the Executive MBA for the open world mean? First of all, when we talk about open world, we mean skepticism towards dogmas, hierarchies, and privileges, both in context of how we teach, but also in composition of the cohort. Diversity is key to creating a successful program, and it's not an empty phrase for us. Secondly, we believe in debate and radical rational thinking. Every idea can be challenged. We believe in facts and arguments rather than narratives and fake news. Narratives create polarization in societies nowadays. And we believe the best way to challenge this narrative-based discourse is to make arguments based on facts and realities, which is the hallmark of Karl Popper's definition of open societies. We are fundamentally opposed to all kinds of discrimination, and we actively promote diversity within our program. The way we finance the scholarship means we create opportunities for people who traditionally have not been able to actually join the program. And we see managers not just as people who deal with businesses or resources, but we also believe that managers go beyond that. They are positive change agents, basically. So what does the classical CEU Executive MBA classroom look like? Currently, we have 65 managers with an average of 14 years of work experience, including a minimum of 3 years of leadership experience in the class. As you can see from the background image, we use state-of-the-art classroom technology and setups in order to facilitate discussion and interaction in class. We make use of case-based learning rather than traditional lectures that you will find in local MBA programs. And we want to take you, experts in your specific field, from the level of operational expertise to the more strategic level. Let's talk about the finances. Tuition is 25,000 euros for the whole program and includes all credits. In order to defray your other costs, we have special rates with partner hotels and discounts for flights with Lufthansa and Austrian Airlines. We invite you to join the open world. The application deadline is June 6th, and the application starts online on our website. I strongly encourage you to apply as soon as possible because we have a first come, first served policy in place. You're invited to book an individual one-on-one consultation with me to discuss your question and optimize your application and discuss available scholarships. I will post the link later in the chat box. I now want to introduce Yusaf Akbar to you, who will deliver the keynote speech. Professor Yusaf Akbar is Associate Professor of Strategy at CEU. He has published over 40 journal articles, 4 books, and numerous contributions to academic and professional research in strategy and international business. He's the founding editor of the International Journal of Emerging Markets, an advisor to governmental authorities. His consulting and professional references include Citibank, Deutsche Telekom, Siemens, Texas Instruments, and Toyota. Yusaf, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'd like to spend a few moments with you sort of talking a little bit about this seemingly elusive concept of life after COVID-19 and sort of walk through some potential long-term impacts of the pandemic and how companies at a strategic level should respond. I think there are 3 key messages I'd like to get across this evening. The first is that in a crisis, strategy doesn't matter. Strategy is a medium to long-term activity. It's not a short-term approach, and that's where crisis management and business continuity kicks in. I think that one of the interesting things about the COVID-19 pandemic is that it's gone through various phases. We all were shocked dramatically by the first arrival of the virus around the world, and then we kind of had a loosening up and people began to relax a little bit. Then we had a very tough, in the Northern Hemisphere, we had a very tough winter, and we've kind of come through that. But all along, of course, anyone who was kind of not reading the newspapers and actually sort of focusing on what people knew what they were talking about, and unfortunately there were very few people out there who did, we discovered that the way out of this, the only way out of this, was through vaccination programs, and we've seen around the world certain countries have done much better at that. The United Arab Emirates has done an incredible job at vaccinating the population. United Kingdom, the United States, and by contrast, other countries around the world have actually done rather poorly. And again, it's worth noting countries like South Korea, Japan, Australia, which apparently had done a great job of suppressing the virus, are now actually struggling with the vaccination program. So I think for companies, it's counterproductive to sort of follow these sort of day-to-day events. It's much better to sort of focus on what the long term means. And I think the second message I'd like to get across to you all is that essentially one size fits all does not work, right? So all companies have been impacted differently by COVID-19. If you're in the hospitality sector, it's a very different situation than perhaps if you're in a digital sector. I mean, you can kind of contrast the success and fortune of the founders of Zoom versus the passenger airlines, which are really struggling very badly indeed. I think the third message is about strategic transformation. And I think what I'd like to sort of communicate here is I think if you look at the period from, the early 1990s to about 2016, let's put it that way, I think we were all focused on globalization, efficiency-driven value chains. I think one thing we may have learned from this lesson is even though efficiency-driven strategies will continue to dominate, I'm not one of these people that's predicting that all of a sudden we'll stop importing most of our manufactured goods from Asia. I think that's going to continue unless another ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, which, by the way, had an almost bigger impact on world trade than 9 months of a pandemic. But I do think companies will have to think about having spare resources in place to deal with relatively short-term issues. Short and maybe near-shoring as a practice may emerge. So let's have a quick look at different sectors and look at the impact. And here I'm going to kind of talk about sort of short term. By short term, we're looking at the beginning of the pandemic, and then we're looking at far term, which is obviously beyond. Hospitality, restaurants, catering has really suffered during the pandemic. They've been shut down for obvious reasons, sort of the issues of the spread of the virus and so forth. However, I think this is a relatively short-term issue. And actually, one of the things, and maybe we can get into this in the Q&A, which is worth discussing, what we may actually see once sort of, vaccination programs have been substantially scaled up around the world, that there's actually going to be a really sudden increase in the demand for hotels, restaurants, and catering, which actually may lead to short-term inflation. But I mean, that's a macroeconomic question, and we can definitely come back to that. By contrast, if you look at international travel, because of ongoing restrictions, I mean, you see, governments love imposing border controls because it's a kind of a sign of a state that functions, right? So even if the justification for border controls, New Zealand is a classic example of this, it's utterly ridiculous, right? They will still continue to maintain border controls well beyond the pandemic. And I was actually reading a report that was just released by the International Air Transport Association as preparation for our discussion this evening. And IATA, which is the airline industry lobby group, are basically saying they don't expect airlines to return to 2019 levels, which was the sort of the high watermark for the industry. They don't expect them to return to until 2025 at the earliest, and that's basically a function of kind of unnecessary, politically expedient sort of continued imposition of border controls. I have to make a trip very soon from Austria to Italy. I need to get a negative COVID test to cross the border from Austria to Italy. I then need to get a negative COVID test to return from Italy to Austria. And this is supposedly in the Schengen area. So this is the kind of fairly irrational but politically motivated border controls. Now, if you look at medical equipment has done very well out of this pandemic. Obviously, PPE has done very well. And now, of course, with the ramp up of the vaccination program, pharmaceutical accessories are booming right now. So if you're producing pharmaceutical accessories, there's an unprecedented demand for those kind of things, syringes, little vials for the sterile vials for the vaccine, and so on. Digital communications has done really, really well in the short term. By digital communications, I'm talking about Zoom, WebEx, Skype, and so on. That's done extremely well in the short term. We'll see whether or not that continues. It may, but as I'll explain later on, I think that we may have reached a high watermark in that sector. Digital media has done extremely well, as many of us have switched from in-store shopping to online shopping, an incredible increase in demand. Being stuck at home, I read a study the other day about Spotify. They've had a tenfold increase in streamed content. Interestingly, the most popular category of streamed content for Spotify has been children's music. So parents with their kids at home sort of try to sort of keep their kids occupied. Similar story for Netflix. If you look at children's movies, cartoons, and so on, that's been a big hit. Jeff Bezos is a richer man today than he was when the pandemic started in March 2020. Has seen a staggering increase in his personal wealth, but I think that just reflects a more general increase in online retail. I think the impact of that longer term is going to be different country by country. Some countries, particularly Anglo-Saxon ones, US, UK, there was already a significant shift towards online retail, which has been intensified by the pandemic. Other countries where in-store retail is still an important feature of the way people interact socially in cities and so on. You can think about Mediterranean countries, for example. That's likely to persist. I mean, China, of course, was already on this staggering, shift towards online retail. Alibaba, Tencent, and these other sort of, Chinese tech firms will continue to benefit from that. Food retail, online has done really well. Actually, some consumer studies show that because other stores were closed, people with disposable income were shifting their expenditure from buying clothes and consumer durables and buying more expensive food. You've probably seen on TV this sort of TV and YouTube, this explosion in kind of home cooking and so on. And that's kind of fed into a generally sort of positive outcome for food and retail. And what we've seen for sports and entertainment is a dramatic shift to interest in esports. So this was a fairly niche category, but because many sports were shut down for many months, you're likely to see esports intensifying in the future. And of course, long term, the big winners will be pharmaceutical companies that produce vaccines, either because they own the patent or because they produce them for other companies. So Pfizer, for example, is working with Sanofi to actually produce vaccine. They don't. Sanofi doesn't have the patent, but they produce it on their behalf. So the big winners in the long term are going to be the pharma companies. Now, if we look at the impact of the pandemic by looking at B2C and B2B, there was lots of panic around supply chains breaking down. And, you saw this ridiculous sort of behavior in the UK, Australia, and the United States where people were buying up, hundreds of rolls of toilet roll and so forth. Actually, what's happened is that supply chains have been remarkably resilient. Now, one thing to watch out in the future, however, is that, if lockdowns are lifted as vaccination programs ramp up, in the last 9 to 11 months, most companies have been running down their inventories, reducing production because of the fall in demand. What may occur after we start picking up is a sudden spike in demand, and that may lead to shortages because people start going out shopping again. In the United Kingdom, just one data point, it's estimated that the average British consumer has saved approximately in euros about 3,000 euros during the pandemic. That's going to translate into increased expenditure when the shops reopen. And some supply chains may struggle with increased demand, which may lead to price inflation. Sales and business development has more or less come to a halt. You can continue to sell to your existing customers, but it's very, very hard to find new customers. When lockdowns are lifted, I suspect that that's going to pick up again. You can go to trade conferences, you can start interfacing with your resellers and so on a face-to-face basis. Corporate services have done okay, a rapid shift to Zoom communication and so on. And because most of these corporate services are back office, there hasn't been significant negative impact. The big winner, digital marketing communications. And I think in the consumer B2C space, that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. The continued blurring of above the line and below the line marketing tactics will continue. The use of internet communications will intensify. And I think probably, if there's anyone who's a big winner from this crisis, it's in the digital marketing and communication space. If we look at B2B, I think it's more or less the same picture, but I will emphasize that business development will be slower to recover, largely because in business to business, it's virtually impossible to find new customers on Zoom. Often because business to business has a long sales cycle, a much more consultative approach. The average value of a purchase in B2B is considerably higher than in consumer. It means that's going to take time to recover. I think supply chain sourcing, largely similar story. Corporate services again. I think the digital marketing and communications in B2B is actually going to revert to mean. So I think it's going to be less of that. We're going to go back to what we were like pre-pandemic. So a quick word on business continuity, right? So continuity now, strategy later. I mean, I think in sectors, relatively easy sectors where you can switch to digital channels, think about education, think about retail, think about financial services. Here, I think continuity is relatively painless, but there is some process re-engineering. I mean, those of us who are doing, education have had to develop new skill sets, managing hybrid learning environments. I've been recently involved with a project where we had, people in class in one country, people in class in another country, and a whole bunch of people online, and that kind of creates some interesting dynamics. And there are some learning, some important learning being done there by educators. I think difficult sectors are going to be the ones that are very, that really struggle with digital alternatives. And I think here it's more about downtime, right? So it's about reviewing, repairing, redesigning of assets, facilities, and processes during the lockdown. So, you can think about certain kinds of manufacturing, heavy industry, and so forth. So, when the crisis subscribes, maybe I should change that to if the crisis subscribes. I hope it's when, not if. I want to focus on two factors moving forward here. I want to focus on changes in buyer behavior and the evolving role of the state. And the key message here I want to communicate to you all is resilience becomes, as important as efficiency. So if you're going to build a strategy in a post-COVID world where, there's going to be political overreaction, there's going to be, concern among relatively uninformed populations, companies need to be prepared for sudden lockdowns, the reimposition of lockdowns, and so on. Let's move straight into the public policy. Quite ridiculous story yesterday came out of New Zealand, a country in the middle of nowhere, right? One person reported positive test because they work at the airport just after they had opened up the so-called travel bubble between Australia and New Zealand, and it was a front page story. So, I think businesses have to be really careful not to be dragged into this kind of, clickbait overreaction that politicians start and the media kind of exaggerates. What we will see is an increased role of state support, both on the macro level and the macro level and the micro level. So governments will increase subsidizing their key strategic sectors. We can already see this with the new Biden administration in the United States. They've already committed $1.9 trillion to a COVID recovery bill. They're now preparing for a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. Of course, we know, obviously in China, state support is an everyday reality. And I think this kind of convergence of sort of very heavy government intervention from the Chinese government and increasing intervention from so-called developed country governments in the Western Hemisphere, I think is going to intensify. France today announced that they're going to pilot a COVID vaccination certificate. In China already, two of China's largest technology firms, Alibaba and Tencent, have developed apps that designate the health status of workers. This, I think, is likely to continue. So the idea that we'll be able to check the status of a worker or an employee, I think, is going to become an everyday reality for a while. Governments love to control borders. They're going to use public health excuses for keeping borders closed in the short term. There's nonsense in New Zealand, for example. And I think they're also going to use sort of public health reasons as a way of kind of limiting competition. The Chinese government have already announced that, you don't have to quarantine if you come to China if you've already had the Chinese vaccine. Most people in the world have not had the Chinese vaccine, so yeah. But they're trying to promote the Chinese pharmaceutical industry, and traveling is just going to be very, very painful for the foreseeable future. I suspect that the time lag between the lifting of domestic restrictions and international travel restrictions is up to 18 months from now. What about the value chain? I don't see significant problems apart from this initial kind of euphoria as we come out of the lockdown. Beyond the euphoria, I think, the supply chains will continue to remain robust as they have throughout the crisis. I think we're going to get, periods where labor shortages will occur because of enforced quarantine, and companies are going to have to get used to sort of, worker rotation, thinking carefully about, who needs to come to the work, who can work from home. With limited travel or travel restrictions, I think business development is going to sort of lag behind the general recovery. Logistics, I think, will evolve. Maybe you're going to have, maybe shorter distances between hub and delivery. Perhaps we might see some of that. I was involved in a supply chain seminar recently with some folks in the industry, in logistics in various sectors, and most folks are hoping that when things kind of get back to normal, we're going to get back into this kind of, routine. And I think the next thing I want to talk about are consumers. And I think this is a very interesting and relatively uncertain future. So I think there are kind of three scenarios here. Return to normal operations, all right? So we repair the damage from the pandemic, we fully resuscitate global supply chains, workers go back to the factories and offices as before, and consumer confidence rebounds. I would give that a maximum 10% probability, right? So I think the idea that we are going to go back to exactly as it was in 2019 in the next 3 to 5 years, I think is probably unlikely. The next scenario would be moderate adjustment to new reality. So we're going to have more digital work than we've had before, and then that itself is going to create significant issues. I mean, I think there's a very, very interesting area around human psychology and the separation of work and home. And if more and more people are forced to work from home, I think, we need to be mindful of the impacts of that. I think B2C is going to continue its kind of relentless path towards online selling, which I think will lead in some countries wholesale clearing out of the retail workforce, as I say, UK, US, other Anglo-Saxon countries. It may not be less marked in other countries where you will still have traditional retail. I think AI and robotics will be speeded up because of this pandemic. So if you can replace humans in factories with AI and robots, you may accelerate your investments in that area. And then I think, rather than a kind of V-shaped recovery where we come out of the pandemic and everyone is crazy and happy and everything's fine, maybe we'll have a U-shaped recovery, and depending on the fiscal and monetary policies. I mean, Biden has made it clear it's going to be serious government intervention to sort of, pump money into the economy around probably when, over the next 10 years, $4 to $5 trillion of public money will be pumped into the US economy if Biden gets his legislation through. In the European Union, as some of you may know, there's been a kind of common fund that's been set up, just under $1 trillion. So as usual in Europe, we do things by half measures, and as a consequence, half the result. And then if you kind of, you go over to Asia, in particular China, I mean, the Chinese government is intensifying substantially its public support for industry. I would give the moderate adjustments to new reality, probably a 70% likelihood, right? And that brings me to the final scenario, which is fundamental structural change. And here, I think we do actually see the end of globalization as we know it. So essentially what happens is, different regions of the world economy become highly integrated, but there are large kind of barriers between regions of the economy. And I'm thinking here in particular about the failure of the One Belt, One Road initiative, which is key to sort of China's economic development. I think local regional supply chains will develop in the radical fundamental scenario. Work-life model shifts fundamentally. Less than half the people that were working in offices return to the offices, which is going to kill off the commercial real estate sector. We're going to get universal basic income because many of the jobs that occurred before the pandemic will disappear and will not be replaced because AI and robotization will replace humans in factories. And I think we may see fundamental changes in sort of consumer behavior. People have got used to the idea of not shopping for 18 months. people may be, after the initial euphoria, people may be less interested in shopping in the future, which I think is correlated with broader generational changes as sort of Generation Z and Generation A sort of, grow up. We may see less interest in kind of materialism. So, in summary, before I get to that, my apologies. I would give the fundamental structural change like a 20% chance, so 1 in 5 chance that we get to that place, particularly if the pandemic, persists for longer than 2 years. We may see that coming to fruition. So key takeaways. I mean, if it's the unlikely return to normal operations, COVID-19 is about upgrading and refitting and preparing for relaunch. Yeah. The most probable scenario, we will do all of that, but I think we're going to see 2 other important steps taken strategically. Firstly, our value chains are going to become more digitized than they've been before. And I think secondly, we're going to rethink organizational structures and value chain activities, as I've discussed. And in the 1 in 5 scenario, we have a much more fundamental reimagining of company strategy from top to bottom. So entirely new ways of thinking. There are some folks out there, Jeremy Rifkin and others, that have been writing before the pandemic about this sort of fundamental shift from traditional capitalist production towards kind of post-capitalist production. And we may see that. And the pandemic may have kind of, accelerated that trend. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening. Time for some questions. Thank you.
Have been submitted to me in the private chat. I've collected a couple of them. So let's start with, you mentioned New Zealand. The person from the audience is asking, what is your criticism? Because the opposition to New Zealand's approach, New Zealand's approach is considered the best practice in the media. What is your concrete criticism on that, on the New Zealand approach?
Because it's nonsense. But anybody else, we can't learn anything from New Zealand unless we are a highly isolated island with a very homogenous population in the middle of nowhere. So this idea, I mean, and this is exactly the problem of kind of, paying attention to the media. When this pandemic is over, I will publish on LinkedIn an article that I've been writing over the months, which will completely troll a whole bunch of people that have basically been saying, if only we could be like New Zealand, if only we could be like Australia, if only we could be like totalitarian societies like Vietnam. It doesn't work in most places. Virus suppression works when you are isolated, where you can literally stop anybody from coming into your country. And no disrespect to New Zealand, which I understand is a beautiful country, and maybe one day I'll get a chance to visit it. But frankly, the numbers of people flying into New Zealand is a fraction of the number of people passing through Heathrow Airport, Frankfurt Airport, New York, Beijing, Dubai. It does not make any sense. So the media may want to go on and on about New Zealand, but we should just ignore the media. They simply don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Valid point. In our predictions about COVID over the past year, what have we got right? What have we done right? And what have we got wrong, according to you?
So I think one decision that was made very quickly was to make it relatively easy for logistics to keep going. So, the rules on entry for truck drivers and for merchant sailors was relaxed relatively easy. So we've been able to kind of keep commerce ticking over. I think that's been a very important and very sensible decision that was taken. I think, the closing of very high touch interactions between people was a sensible idea. So the closing of nightclubs, personal services, I think was a relatively sensible policy to take. I mean, I feel sorry obviously for the entertainment sector and, and the personal services sector. They've affected really badly. I think many countries around the world have have had sensible macroeconomic policies around, as you know, Thomas, in the German-speaking world of Kurzarbeit, this sort of keeping people employed, keeping salaries close to 100% in order to maintain demand. I mean, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, if you look at the US went the other way. They went through the unemployment insurance route. So unemployment hit these ridiculous heights at the start of the pandemic. What we're seeing in initial numbers now, as the US vaccination program has scaled up, unemployment is falling dramatically. So we'll see what happens here, because many countries are still using this kind of Kurzarbeit system. When that's lifted, we'll see what happens. So those are the things I think have been done really well. I mean, where do I start on the things that have been done badly? I mean, late reactions to almost everything. A complete lack of coordination. I mean, I think the European Union in particular is especially guilty of this, right? The one thing the EU had to do during this crisis was coordinate. But politicians, including, if I may say so, to my colleague from the Austrian embassy, Sebastian Kurz, has used COVID as a pathetic political tool to demonstrate fake sovereignty. And that's actually created more problems than it solved. And by the way, it's not just Kurz, everyone across Europe has been doing this, right? So it would have been much better from the get-go that a European level coordination of travel regulations, European level coordination, and again, this is the problem with the media, right? We say we don't believe in fake news as a program, and I think we don't believe in fake news. I mean, everyone who knew anything about this, that a coordinated European vaccination program would take longer to scale up than a British vaccination program. But here we've been in Europe going, oh, if only we were like Britain, if only we could have a vaccination program like that. This was always going to take time. But actually, famous prediction, quote me when I'm wrong, 6 months from now, the EU will be ahead of the UK. Because once the program ramps up, once production, the new factory that's just been opened up in Germany for Pfizer, the facilities in the Netherlands and Belgium, which are now producing at a much higher rate, when these things start coming online, you're going to find a very, very quick increase in vaccination programs. Again, since we're an Austrian institution, I mean, this whole idea that we would actually take Sputnik, which is a very good vaccine, by the way, from Russia, but wait for the EMA to approve it, that's nothing but a hollow political gesture. It has zero impact on public policy, public health, because even if we buy vaccine from Russia, which maybe we should, because it is a very good vaccine, we're just going to keep it in storage for months, because the European Medicines Agency is not going to go out of its way for geopolitical reasons to quickly approve Russia's vaccine. Right? I could go on this for hours for the bad things. So let's not waste everyone's time. Let's move on to the next question.
Media sometimes state that democracies are not able to react promptly because they are fundamentally based on compromise, on discussion, on debate. What do you think of this argument?
Brazil's not doing very well, is it? And that's a pretty authoritarian country.
Well, I'm not implying that authoritarian countries are making it better as a principle. I'm just saying the argument that democracies are handling it worse because of their political structure, because of the way decisions are made.
I don't want to blame ordinary people for the incompetence of their leaders. It's not like Switzerland, where you have referendums on collecting the trash. Has any democracy had a referendum on whether or not we should have a vaccine? Of course not. This is a problem of elites and governments, and this continued sort of pathetic point scoring, when what we should be doing as democracies is focusing on the fundamental reason why we're a democracy, which is serving the people that elect us. So again, I don't blame the fact that we have an open, transparent political system where debate occurs. I blame the incompetence of governments in not, I mean, anybody who knew anything about this crisis at the very start said, this crisis is over when vaccines are produced. If politicians had said to their electorates, folks, I really have to deliver bad news to you. This pandemic is over when the vaccination program is scaled up. As opposed to, yes, don't worry, another 3 weeks, we'll have a lockdown, and then we'll have a lifting of the lockdown. Oh, but look, the numbers are going up again. Let's have another lockdown, right? All this this bizarre idea that you can suppress this virus. I mean, just this stupid New Zealand, Australian approach is just totally bizarre, right? Politicians should have just said, guys, this is the next 12 to 18 months is going to be absolute hell. And I don't want to lie to you, but we're going to do everything we can in our power to produce a vaccine, which is going to actually get us out of this mess, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not about democracy versus authoritarianism. It's about the way elites, because they lack courage, have not stood up and actually told the people exactly what the truth is.
Another question from the audience: what did you underestimate in terms of COVID impact?
I think, this transformation to digital, I certainly underestimated. I mean, it's been extraordinary. And it also speaks to the human ingenuity that we've been able to transform from very traditional face-to-face interactions. I mean, look at this, Thomas. I mean, when was the last time you organized a face-to-face open day? Can you remember?
I remember us doing an open day in early March 2020.
And I mean, it speaks to the EMBA office's ingenuity that you've been able to actually reverse engineer an open day that can now be run completely online.
Right.
And the fact is that more people watch the recording of the open day posted on social media after the event than physically attend an open day that we would normally have had, right? And that's really extraordinary, and that's something I completely underestimated.
I think it's clear for our participants, for stakeholders, we cannot change the circumstances, we cannot change government regulations, we cannot change the development of the virus, etc. But I think what we proved is agility. We adapted to this completely new situation in the best way we could. We had to make decisions. Some people like them, some people don't like them, of course. But I think we proved agility, don't you think?
I agree. And when you were speaking, Thomas, I mean, I then thought to myself, okay, what should we not underestimate moving forward? And I think one thing we should definitely not underestimate is the impact of no school for secondary school and primary school students. Children and teenagers desperately need social interaction as part of their development. And I think as a society, we need to be very conscious of what happens when kids go back to school on a full-time basis, and be very mindful of the impact of more than a year of online schooling for society. I think one more thing we should not underestimate in the future is the impact on organized events of the pandemic and people's anxiety with going back to organized events. I'm thinking about theater, cinema, sporting events, concerts. I mean, these are very big parts of many economies, right? Billions and billions of dollars are generated in these kinds of things. I mean, you think about the city of Vienna and the ball season and the opera and the museums, right? So cities with very strong cultural heritage need to be very mindful about how we build a system in place where we can get close to the numbers we were getting before the pandemic hit.
Before we move on to the part where our participants and alumni will have the opportunity to talk to our attendees, I would like to ask you the last question. What do you see as major challenges as we hopefully exit the COVID pandemic?
The resumption of international travel is a major challenge moving forward. We're going to have to confront civil liberties questions, balancing public health concerns with civil liberties. Austria, has a very strong post-World War II tradition of defending civil liberties, enshrined in the Constitution. And, countries like Austria, I think, are going to have some very difficult conversations about, individual freedoms versus public health. In other countries, it's not so much of an issue. And it doesn't surprise me, for example, that France has kind of, started this process. I think Germany will have similar challenges to Austria because of the constitutional arrangements. And I think, vaccine hesitance. I mean, I think we're probably going to need regular vaccinations in the future. So having systems in place where we can deal with vaccinating the population, managing short-term spikes in infections in terms of the workforce, I think these are all issues that we need to address.
I totally agree, and I think that question of civil liberties starts with very banal questions like the planned or the discussed obligation to vaccinate people. Should there be the obligation to vaccinate people? I mean, there are so many perspectives from the civil rights perspectives. What right is more important in our society right now? The individual right to decide on your well-being or not well-being, or the right of the mass to be to achieve herd immunity. I think I agree. I think there's going to be very interesting questions that are quite worth a debate in our societies, and I think there's going to be lots of debate in the near future.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't necessarily see I don't see a conflict between the two. Again, if political and business leaders are willing to stand up and explain to people why we need to do this, I think we can succeed. But if politicians in particular, say one thing to one group and say something else to another for political expediency, we could have an issue moving forward.
Right. Thank you very much, Yusuf. I'm moving on to our participant session. We've invited Olga Ivanova and Alina Petukova to this session. I kindly ask you to unmute Alina and Olga. And I would like to start with Olga. Olga Ivanova is the Ethics and Compliance Director of Eli Lilly Russia. And I would like to ask Olga just the very general question, why did you choose CEU Executive MBA when you were searching for executive MBA education back then?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon for all participants. It's a great pleasure to see so many participants during this call. And I just want to confirm that this is a great opportunity for me to present this educational program and to have a chance to join this educational program. For me, it was important to get additional knowledge, additional experience, and to get it from people who have the same environment as, for example, I have. Like to be in a good network connection with European citizens, with people who understand business environment and business processes and challenges that we have in Russia. And we are I cannot say that we are similar, but we can learn from each other because we work together. We work in the same geopolitical situation, and so we very often face the same challenges in Russia and in Europe. And for me, I didn't have any doubts when I saw the program, when I saw the a schedule of modules that you presented before. And it was absolutely clear for me that this is a valuable program for people who have already a business experience in international companies and in different industries. And of course, it's a great possibility to be a part of the team of people who can give additional experience and provide us with knowledge and experience that they have and manage to get during their career path in different countries and companies as well.
I mean, the funny thing, we didn't plan this, to be honest. The funny thing is that Yusuf was mainly talking about pharmaceutical, or he mentioned a lot of, many times, the pharmaceutical industry, and it just so happens that you're coming from the pharmaceutical industry. I think that's a very pleasant coincidence tonight. Can you talk about the diversity in class, not just with regard to, I mean, any kind of diversity, you know, gender equality, nationalities, different educational and industry backgrounds. Can you talk about the diversity in class that you are a part of?
No, diversity, this is like a part of our life right now. And we, I present pharmaceutical industry, and of course we have so many cases related to pharmaceutical products and for pharmacy and challenges in pharmaceutical industry. So because we had such pandemic situation, but what is interesting in the program that I joined is that we consider different business cases, and they're all related to the challenges and opportunities that we have with this particular situation or companies have in the future. And what is also interesting for me is that when we consider such cases, we consider real cases. It's not like something that was created just for study purposes. No, all situations are real. We see circumstances that we have right now or had like just 1 month ago, and we provide our suggestions for solution for particular situations, for current situations in business. And this is great, and it's not only for pharmaceutical or automobile or aircraft industry or something like this. So we have a choice to choose any industry that could be interesting for us. Like for example, even for events organizations, that also was mentioned before, is a challenge for such pandemic situation. We also considered this business case, and we provided solution like so like a possible solution for the business in the situation what company faced through. Diversity, this is a key point for this educational program, and possibility to understand different approaches from different industries. So this is the main advantage of this program as well.
Thank you very much. I mean, you just mentioned the diversity. Just to clarify for the attendees how we in class enforce diversity. When you're in a module or in some of the modules, you're working in support teams, and we allocate those support teams not just by chance, or we're not, you know, rolling a dice on who's going to be in what group. We put very much thought into allocating, into building up those groups, because we want people to be in groups, in most diverse groups. So you won't be in a support team with people coming from your country, coming from your industry, speaking the same language. We want to offer diversity, because this is where the learning experience kicks in. If there's just a group of, let's say, consultants in one group, basically all the consultants, all the people in that group would have to tell each other the same story. They know the same problems, they know their industry approaches, but to hear from other people, from human rights activists, from people coming from NGOs, from public sector officials, from entrepreneurs, different styles of decision-making, of solution finding, this is where, you know, the force of diversity kicks in, and where you actually are able to learn and get the most out of diversity.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for mentioning this, because I just wanted to echo you, because we have already different supportive teams during the first year of our education, and this is great also, because we managed to change our mind, we managed to change our approach. We need to find solutions with new people, and it's also always a challenge for every team member. And I think such approach provides us like a valuable input for everybody, especially if we are talking if we are talking about like changes of our supportive teams. As I said, it's always like additional challenge for each team member, and additional learning and additional expertise that we can get from each other.
The last question for you: what do you want to take away, as you know, for your personality, for your professional life? What do you want to take away from Executive MBA?
No, I want to be better, really. I want to be better in taking of solution approach, in the way how to analyze data, in the way how to analyze information, what kind of input to consider to make a really valuable solution for me personally and for business, for company where I work for right now. And this is the main purpose for me. And you provide such opportunity because you give us the possibility to grow up, to learn more, and to be in different situations. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, and thank you very much for this, because through coming this we make be better. This is what I want to get.
Thank you, Olga. We're honored and pleased to have you in our participants class, in our cohort. Thank you very much, Olga, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
I would like to move on to Alina Petukova. She's Senior Data Scientist and Team Lead at Demand Helm here in Russia, I think. And I would basically like to get to know the same, I would like to ask you the same questions. Can you please tell us something about your background and why you chose CEU Executive MBA back then?
Yes, of course. Good evening to everyone. So I'd like to start with my decision, how I decided to go for CEU and why I decided to join MBA program in general. So my decision, when I was choosing the program, I was trying to analyze the different institutes which providing the different opportunities for us. And I just stopped my decision on CEU because of the main concept which university represents. So it's important for me that university supports open society, diversity, as we already talked about today, and as well as the opportunity for education for everyone. And since the rest of my educations are coming from Russia, so I finished my master's and PhD in Russia, so it was very important for me to get into the European educational program, and as well as to get to know a market and the processes, what's happening in Europe better, because I think it's very important for personal and professional development.
How do you experience diversity in class? I mean, diversity is an important issue, as you can, as you've noticed, I guess. But what is your perspective on this?
Especially in my support team, we had very different backgrounds. We had some people from pharma, we had some people from banking sector, we had like people from industries as well. And since these teams are constantly rotating, we have an opportunity to get to know a majority of the class and get familiar with different problems and challenging, and maybe participate in the solutions of them. And
what you want to take away from the Executive MBA? What is your expectation or your hope?
Well, for me, it's very important the type of people what I'm meeting. So to build my network and the sense of community which CEU represents. So, and I think it's going to be the main outcome of this program. Well as this ability to solve business cases and to see how business functions in the higher levels.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alina. I would like to move on to Elena, who actually has done the CEU MBA. I would like to introduce Elena Svobodina to you. She's the managing partner at ProNego Russia. Welcome, Elena. Привет.
Thank you. Привет. Привет.
You're so much involved in the alumni community of CEU MBA. You're part of the advisory board. Can you tell the audience about the academic excellence of CEU MBA and the alumni network?
It was a great decision. I mean, one of the great decisions of that I made in my life when I decided to join the program. So for me, the essence of the program remains the same. CEU always targets different experience, mix them, trying to create these connections, neuro-linguistic connections in a person or a manager's mind. And I think that's great. So it helped me a lot in my career.
I mean, that's good to hear. You're still involved, you're still engaged with Executive MBA. As I already said, you're part of the advisory board,
Yes.
still supporting us, giving us precious advice on, the current challenges, etc. You are part of that alumni family. I just want to point out to the attendees that the CEU Alumni Network is professionally organized via our Alumni Relations Department. They are basically organizing the alumni events for 18,000 professionals all over the world. And of course, we have this CEU Executive MBA alumni circle on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and it's very easily approachable. Just to give you an impression, when we've done last year the open days in Munich and Zurich, I just reached out on LinkedIn and Facebook in those groups to people I didn't know back then if they are willing to support us at these open days, and they didn't hesitate at all and just responded, of course. And I met those people at open days. They helped us recommend people. They helped us advocate the program. They helped us logistically. We had dinners in their cities, and we just connected and networked. And I think this shows that CEU is a network. CEU Executive MBA is a network, an alumni network that you can count on. And I think Jelena is just the perfect example of being engaged after almost 20 years and still committed to the development of Executive MBA and still committed to the mission of the university. Thank you very much.
This is the least I can do, because I'm really grateful, not only for the knowledge that I received at school, not only the career that I had after I graduated, but also those people you mentioned that we are very active. I think 5 years ago, maybe more, we met all the students from my group, and it was like 80% who decided to come to Budapest for reunion, and we still contact each other, we still help each other. We all live in different countries in Europe, but always recommend each other, meet when people travel in London or Moscow. So I think it was I'm very grateful. Not mentioning that I had the privilege to meet Dalai Lama and George Soros.
Wow.
The walls of the Dalai Lama lived in our dormitory.
I didn't know that. That's impressive. That must be very inspiring to meet those people.
Yeah. So it was a very, very great time. So of course I helped, and I hope to help more.
Thank you very much, Elena. I'm looking at the clock. I'm afraid I have to move on to the Q&A session because I've collected so many questions from the audience. Thank you very much. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Alina. Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much. So I've collected questions from the audience, and as I can see, the elephant in the room, of course, is still COVID-19. I would like to start with the first question on this topic, which is, what are the COVID measures taking in place on campus, and if there's online education? So we've put very much effort in ensuring the highest safety standards on site. We provide antigen testing every 2 days at the upcoming module. We enforce everybody to wear FFP2 masks on campus. It's an obligation to wear masks on campus. We have split the group in 2 rooms, in 2 auditoriums, in order to facilitate social distancing. And we have a medical team on campus if somebody, feels sick, etc. So on campus, the highest safety standards are in place. When it comes to online education, we are, I think Yusuf mentioned this before, I'm not so sure, we are not fully moving to online education because an executive MBA is more than just watching a YouTube video on finance. An executive MBA is about interaction, it's about networking, it's about debate, it's about interaction in class. And this is something you cannot facilitate in a Zoom call, because with our learning approach, teaching is not only done from a teacher to a student, it's also done from a student to the teacher, and it's done among students, among participants. So when you're in class, you will listen to your participants, you will react to participants, you will debate passionately about the stuff that has been said in class. That's basically what we are looking for, but this cannot be done online. However, we offer online education, and we're about to offer a hybrid format for people who want to do it online because of underlying health conditions, or they are not able to travel, or they want to watch online. So it's a hybrid format at your convenience that fits your life. The second question that I receive on a regular basis is the formal criteria, which are the criteria for a successful application for the Executive MBA. So the most important formal criteria, I would say, is at least 8 years of work experience. We are looking for experienced managers who are able to share their experience, who are able to share best practice and worst practice examples, who have experience, who have lived through, good times and bad times, and are willing to share that to their peers in class. Of those 8 years of work experience, we're looking for 3 years of any kind of leadership or managerial experience, knowing that many jobs don't carry leadership or managerial experience in their job title. So you can present this in your cover letter. You can explain this, why you are eligible for the Executive MBA. Another criteria that we're looking for is the undergraduate degree. So you would have to have at least a bachelor's or master's or PhD degree in order to apply for the Executive MBA, regardless of the educational background or the field you were studying. For us, we offer a diverse classroom. We have people coming from humanities, we have people coming from economics, from business. We have medical doctors in the program. We have people who studied law. We have people who have a technical engineering background or IT background. It really doesn't matter what your major was, as long as you have the undergraduate degree in whatever degree it was. Sociology, history, everything is fine. Another formal criteria is the proficiency in English, of course. The Executive MBA, the work language is English. You can present the proof of English until September 2021. You don't have to have the English certificate at the time of application. So you have enough time to present that proof of English until September. And of course, the documents that are required for a successful application are a CV, are a cover letter where you should explain your eligibility, your motivation, and not just, you should tell us your strengths. You should be honest about your weaknesses. We're not judging you on your weaknesses. We're interested in getting to know the real you. And in the cover letter, you should mention both how you would benefit from the Executive MBA, which is in most cases an obvious question and an obvious answer, but also vice versa. We are interested in what you could bring to the Executive MBA. What can you bring to the table? What is your experience? What is your background? What is your approach where people could benefit from you in the current cohort? The question on the formal criteria basically directly brings me to the next logical step, to the next logical question, which is the application process. How does the application work? So the application starts online via our website. Everything is done online. You can upload the documents that I've just mentioned. You can create a profile. You can edit the profile. You don't have to apply in one go. You can start your application today and finish it in, let's say, a week. However, as I said, we encourage you to apply as soon as possible because we have a first come, first served policy. And once study seats are taken, we would, there's nothing we can do about the study seats. The application process is once you submitted your application, we and the admissions office revise it and check it for completeness and formal criteria, of course, assuming that you meet all those criteria and assuming that your documents are complete, we will invite you for an interview with the faculty director, and he will assess basically based on a fixed questionnaire. We will assess your motivation and your leadership experience and your CV. We're not playing mind games in the interview. It's just a way to getting to know you. Once your interview has been completed, you will be assessed by the faculty director, and based on that score, you will receive an admission decision. And the very interesting fact is that your application will be handpicked by the rector. So your your application will be presented to the rector, and you will be handpicked like Olga and Alina have been picked by the rector. A question that I received on the modular or the modules is on the thesis, if there is a thesis, and what about the exams? The first question is pretty easy. You're not required to write a thesis. We don't have a thesis. We don't want you to study on the executive level for 2 years and then get lost in a library and never finish your master thesis of 100 pages, which will disappear in a library. We want you to engage in a capstone project, which will accompany you for 2 years. You will work on the capstone project for 2 years with your team, with your professors, and it's going to be a project that fits your reality, your professional reality, and you can choose it in consultation with your professor. The question on exams is, again, simple, I think. We are not inviting you to Vienna or Budapest to join the modules and to attend the modules and then have you sit in class and write an exam. This will be done at home. If there are any exams, they can be done at home. You have a time frame of 2 or 3 weeks after your module where you can do the exam from home online at your convenience. This can be done on the weekend, this can be done during the day, this can be done at night. It's up to you, and it's an open book exam. As I said, not all the modules will be assessed on an exam. There are modules that can be easier assessed with an exam, like finance modules, but like like marketing, etc. Those modules you will be assessed on. You will be assessing every module on a 360-degree peer evaluation. So it's not just the teacher that is grading you; it's also your class, your fellows that will be evaluating your contribution to debate, your attendance, your teamwork, your style, your way of interaction with fellows. So it's a very comprehensive evaluation that is going on. And of course, we're an American university, so all other activities will influence your grade as well. Class attendance, class participation, teamwork, presentations, that will be part of your grade as well. I've received the question, a very interesting question, if the number of applicants decreased during the pandemic. We have seen, like in the last year, when we were recruiting in March 2020, of course, we saw a drop in applications because we were facing this whole new situation with a pandemic, and I do feel the uncertainty, or I could feel the uncertainty of people not willing to commit to an executive MBA in March 2020, when we didn't know where this situation would lead. But I can tell from this year's application round that we are not receiving less applications, but of course the industries have changed where people are coming from and applying from. So of course, I mean, it's kind of obvious that, for example, the tourism industry, we're receiving less applications from the tourism sector, but we are receiving more and more applications from digital companies or people working in the digital field or online, whatever that industry. You know, it's a very big keyword, but everything it perfectly fits into what Yusuf said. Those industry who emerge stronger from the crisis, there we can see a bigger demand on applications. Another question is about the accreditation. We have EU and US accreditation, which is a major advantage because we are an international university and we're not sure where you're going in the future. It might lead you to Europe, it might lead you to the US or any other market. But with this degree, you're perfectly prepared on both markets because the degree is a double degree and it's valid on both markets in the EU because we're an Austrian university and in the US. So it's basically a double win situation for you. Another question is the importance of leadership in the curriculum. Leadership has a very big importance in our curriculum. You will be in a leadership module. You will be in 3 leadership modules. Every summer module will deal with leadership. And I don't know of any other program that puts so much effort into leadership and into educating leaders with soft tools and with knowledge, but also with soft tools and social skills. So the leadership is a huge part of our curriculum. I was receiving a question about the alumni network. I think I've basically said everything about the alumni network. It's an alumni elite network. It's a global network of 18,000 alumni all around the world, basically. They're easily approachable in every major city, in every country. You can just reach out to them via LinkedIn or Facebook. And we have this very American approach that our alumni are approachable. You don't have to know them in person. You can just establish contact through social media and ask them whatever your intention is. If you just want to make friends, if you want to meet professionally, if you're looking for somebody in a specific company or in a specific market, our alumni are well connected and are on the senior level and always happy to help. I have seen that in person and it's really true. And it's 7:30. I would like to conclude with the last question, with 2 last questions. How are we enforcing diversity in class? As we've said, diversity is not an empty phrase for us. We are proactively looking for a diverse class, and we're trying our best to empower and encourage people with a diverse background to join this class. We are aiming for a 50-50 gender equality in class. We are aiming to include people coming from the LGBT background. We're having fellowships for Romani managers. We have fellowships for business women in Russia and Central Asia. Or in Turkey. We have diversity fellowships in France and the United Kingdom. We have a social mobility fellowship in Germany. We have a fellowship for entrepreneurs in Estonia and Austria. So we are actively encouraging people to join our executive MBA cohort with these fellowships, which brings me to the very last question of this evening, but it's always the elephant in the room, if there are scholarships available. As I said, the tuition is 25,000 euro, but we offer a variety of scholarships to our participants because we don't want to price people out of the program who are not able to afford the program or who have this diversity background. So if you're interested in the scholarships that we offer to join one of the most renowned universities in the world, please feel free to get in touch with me. And I will be, I'm just sharing the link in order for you to book a one-on-one consultation with me, because I would like to discuss your application and your scholarship availability opportunities in a private conversation, because this cannot be, we cannot talk about this private information on here. But I can say that we have a vast variety of scholarships available: the Open World Scholarship, the need-based scholarship, and those country-specific merit-based scholarships. And I will be happy to talk about them in a one-on-one consultation. Just use this link and book a time slot at your convenience, and we can have a discussion. It's 7:30. I would like to thank all the people who were committed to this open day, who actually made it happen: Olga, Alina, Yelena, and Advantage, Austria, Moscow, and Yusuf. Thank you very much. And I would like to say goodbye to our attendees. Thank you very much for coming tonight.